and you all know this now, your brain runs on glucose. And your brain consumes an enormous amount of energy when it's really busy. All right, so even though you're sitting there and you're studying and studying, your body's not moving, but if you're really engaged, you're burning a lot of calories. You're consuming a lot of oxygen and a lot of glucose, which is why you're tired after you're learning. While you're learning, and you may not know this, it might not be covered, but as you're learning, a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much, the neurons in your brain are actually growing. And the complexity of the interconnection between those neurons is increasing as you're learning. You're actually building knowledge in your brain physically. And that's why it's energy consuming. So you do need energy. And nutrient, it's not quite the way to say it. I wanted to say it to nutrientize your brain. It's not the correct way to say it, but you get the idea. You want a fairly steady flow of energy. Not sugar, though. As you've all discovered, and now you probably know the pathophysiology of what happens when you take a big dose of sugar. Your energy goes, and then about 20 minutes later, the sugar crash. And quite often, the sugar crash is unrecoverable for a couple of hours. So you want complex carbohydrates. You want them in small doses, spread out over time, with lots of water. So as boring as it sounds, celery, because celery is mostly water, is probably a really good snack food to have there while you're studying. Water's pretty important, but even more important is moving around, because again, your brain's running on oxygen, it's running on glucose, and so when you're sitting down a lot, your heart rate gets low, and that means less blood flow to your brain. And the less blood flow to your brain, the slower and harder learning is. So quite often when you have that sort of fade away, when this starts to happen, a good solution is to grab your textbook, stand up. You burn twice as many calories while standing than you do while sitting. The moment that you stand up, your heart rate goes up, the blood flow increases, and your brain benefits from that. Walk around, reading the book. Sometimes clear off a shelf on your bookshelf. Put the book there and have a standing desk. Or you stand and read. Yeah, get the treadmill out, put the book there. That'll really get your heart rate going. And may cause other things, but the idea is you want to manage your nutrition and your energy level. However, and I want to come back to, is that procrastination, and I'll talk more a bit about procrastination later on, although I can talk about it a bit now. The key to procrastination is that it's task avoidance. There is something about the thing that you're doing that you don't like, right? It's human nature to avoid pain. If you touch a hot burner on the stove, it hurts, you yank your hand back. If you open up your paramedic textbook and the first thought through your head is, oh, I hate this stuff. It's so boring. It's not relevant. Where are the pictures? I don't see any pictures. How can I learn without pictures? Or you're overwhelmed. Oh, man, the exam's tomorrow. There's so much. There's 8,000 pages here, and I got to learn it all. I'm going to fail. Okay? Open up book, have a thought, have a negative experience. Boredom is a negative experience. Anxiety is a negative experience. Feeling overwhelmed is a negative experience. Open up the book, experience something negative, looks like the book caused it, solution, back slowly away from the book and go do something else. And you could do that the overt procrastination, where you go for your 10th dinner, or you clean your apartment. I had a cleaner for a roommate when I was in university. It was great. I would come home, guy, mopping the floor. Hey, Chris, how's it going? Oh, pretty good. Oh, I see you're cleaning. Yep. Essay due, eh? Yep. When's it due? Tomorrow. So it's great if you can pick a roommate who is a procrastinator cleaner, or my other favorite, the baker. Residents love the baking procrastinator, because when they want to procrastinate, they go bake cookies. So how do you tell the difference, though, between a legitimate break and a procrastinating break? The legitimate need for brain food versus the avoidance of the task. And there's no easy answer to that. other than to pay attention to yourself and know what your own procrastination strategy is. If you're a cleaner and you're cleaning, you might want to, and you have an urge, usually there's an urge to clean, and you go, okay, well, is this because of the studying, or is this actually because the dust bunnies have run wild in the apartment? And if the answer is, actually the place is pretty clean, okay, thank your brain, thank you frontal lobes for providing that procrastination excuse, thank you brain, and go right back to studying. Note your own way of talking yourself out of doing these things. Now, another thing, and I'll just wrap this up. I'm going to pick on whatever book this is. A really simple strategy for dealing with procrastination is called the 5-minute technique. So when you open up the book and you have the thought, I don't want to do this, I have this urge to go clean or bake some cookies, just make this deal with yourself. No matter how boring, overwhelming, intimidating, or whatever this is, I can hack it for 5 minutes. I can put up with the pain for 5 minutes. And if you're a hardcore procrastinator, go to the dollar store and get a timer, kitchen timer. Set it for 5 minutes, put it down, right? And study 100% for 5 minutes until the alarm goes off. That's 5 minutes of real studying, not 5 minutes of organizing your desk, sharpening your pencils, getting everything perfect to study. That's procrastinating. 5 minutes of really, really doing the work. After 5 minutes, you'll probably discover when the alarm goes off that one of two things have happened. First of all, body in motion stays in motion. Once you get started, you tend to keep going. For most people who are procrastinating, it's the most procrastination is at the beginning of the task. And you can set a goal tonight. You know, at 7 o'clock, I'm going to study and read chapter 4. And right now at 11:30, you're going to feel really motivated, right? Can you do it? Yeah, sure, I can study tonight at 7 o'clock, read that chapter 4. You bet. But as you approach 7 o'clock, your resistance to doing that will start to increase and reach its maximal at 6:59. You had that experience? Yeah. So break it apart. Just 5 minutes of the task. You might have scheduled 3 hours to read chapter 4, but your commitment at that moment is to just read 5 minutes. That's all you really got to do. That's why you get a timer, because the timer makes it clear. Just 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Really, truly only 5 minutes. Do 5 minutes. When the alarm goes off, then you make a snap decision about whether you want to do another 5 minutes or stop and take a break. I say snap because your brain, your ever helpful brain, will offer you lots of other opportunities to clean and bake and things like that. So quickly, can I do another 5 minutes? Yeah, reset it, go right back in. If you decide to take, and by the way, that's usually the choice you'll take, because once you get into it, you find out it's not as boring, irrelevant as it is. And even if you did discover it, well, it doesn't matter, you're already in, you might as well keep going. I can do another page, right? It's getting started. If you take a break, then another rule steps in. And the rule is you must also time your break. You don't want to break until you feel like studying again, because that'll never happen. Nobody feels like studying. Studying is a highly artificial thing. Learning is very normal, but studying isn't. Nobody wakes up in the, well, actually that's not true. There are people who wake up first thing in the morning and go, awesome, I get to read a textbook this morning. I'm so excited, I can't wait. Very rare. You're reading the textbook for a purpose. It's goal-directed, value-directed behavior. But if you're waiting to feel motivated to study, you're going to be waiting a long time. And usually when that happens, the feeling will be the night before the exam, and the feeling will be terror. That's when you'll feel motivated to study. But it's too late at that point. So don't ask yourself, do I feel like taking a break, or do I feel like continuing to study? Never trust your feelings. Go, if I'm going to take a break, I'm going to break for 5 minutes. Reset the alarm, get the kind that clips to your belt, go take a real break. By real break, I mean a break where you are not thinking about studying. Because if you're over here thinking, oh, I should be, or you're watching TV, and you're not really paying attention to the program because you keep thinking, I should be studying, I should be studying, I should be studying. How many of you had that experience? Yeah. So you're in the worst of both worlds. Neither are you really enjoying the TV, nor are you really studying. You're doing neither. It would be better to, if you're going to take a break, take a legit break, 100%, watch TV, go for a walk, bake the cookies, really, truly, and trust the timer to go off. And when the timer goes off, your deal with yourself is just do another 5 minutes, just do another 5 minutes. Go right back to the book, do another 5 minutes. This will help you make that distinction between, is this legit studying or a legit activity? So do I really need to eat? Or is it procrastination? Because if it's procrastination and you 5-minute your way through it, you'll just keep going. You would have broken the procrastination cycle. If it's a legitimate break, you're going to then, okay, I'm going to take a real break, but you're not breaking forever. You're going to give it a time limit of some kind. Does that help? I should really put stocks in kitchen timer stocks. I do actually recommend that if you struggle with procrastination, actually get the kitchen timer because it makes it real. Really, truly, only 5 minutes. That's all you got to commit to. You don't need to worry about the 5 hours that you think you need to do because that's overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I got 5 hours of pain and boredom. Of course you're going to clean the house instead of reading it. No, it's just 5 minutes. 5, 5, 5. Push yourself. 5 more, 5 more, 5 more. Okay, no, now I really need a break, but I don't need to break until tomorrow. I could break for 30 minutes. Let me go break for 30 minutes and then come back, do another 5, another 5, another 5. Push yourself. Yeah, so the question is, what happens if you've been 5 minutes in a coma? Down here. Great question and a perfect segue, because I wanted to come back to why the fundamental reason why this happens is because you haven't given your brain a job to do. There is this notion that learning is an automatic process, and it happens by osmosis, absorption. So that when you're in front of the textbook, it's almost like this. Knowledge is leaky. It seeps out of the textbook in the form of knowledge rays. And your job as a student is to keep your eyes open so you can capture as many of the knowledge rays emanating from the textbook as possible. And I know that some students have this theory of learning by osmosis because I see them use it in the new Westminster Campus Library. They're studying in there with their textbook, and they actually have a fairly sophisticated version of this learning by osmosis because they think that these knowledge rays follow an inverse square law, which means that the closer you are to the knowledge, the more knowledge rays you capture, right? And I know they have this thought because I see them studying with their frontal lobes right up against the textbook. And when I used to work in the university sector, before I came to the JI, I could always tell the science students from the art students because the art students would put the right hemisphere down and the science students would put the left hemisphere down. And the poor interdisciplinary students that were taking both had to do this all the time. You've all heard of things like tape your lectures and listen to them while you sleep. Doesn't that just give you nightmares? Sit at the front of the room, closer to knowledge. All of these notions of learning, put the textbook under the pillow while you sleep at night because you're close to it. Yeah, you got to put it. Yeah, put it on your head, and ideally you want it so that it cuts off your breathing, so you wake up every once in a while. And if you're really lucky, a little bit of slobber mixes with some of the bold-faced words, which are knowledge incarnate, and they stick on your face. And so when you peel it off, there's actual knowledge stuck into your face. So I want to say this to you. Nobody has ever learned by absorption, by merely being in the presence of knowledge. No learning has ever happened that way. It is all by things that you do with your brain. And there are brain actions that you take that put that information into your memory, and if you don't take those brain actions, they don't go into your long-term memory, and that's it. So there is no learning by osmosis. This is both a good news and a bad news scenario. The good news is if you're not absorbing the material, there's something you can do about that now. Whereas if you believe in learning by absorption, there's nothing you can do. Oh, it didn't stick. It's just not sticking. Sometimes you'll try to blame the book. It's boring. That's why it's not sticking, right? But if it's not sticking, you're out of luck. It's not sticking. There's nothing you can do because you did your job. You opened up the book. You stood in front of it for 2 hours, right? Good news is, if you take the brain actions, learning happens. The bad news about that is action is effortful. The passive absorption approach is easy, because all you got to do is put the textbook under the pillow. Right, that's easy to do. Learning is always effortful. Learning is always hard, because you're building those networks. So, make sense? So let me talk a little bit about how learning actually happens, and then I'll get into some study strategies that capitalize on this. And by the way, how long do I have? Oh, great. So we're going to be, I hope you brought your sleeping bags. I'm kidding. I can't really see the time because it's hidden behind a light. Quarter to 12? Okay. So here's how learning happens. When you first see something in the textbook in the form of information, it goes into something known as short-term memory. How many of you have taken psychology? Great. So you'll remember this a bit from psychology. When the information goes into short-term memory, you don't want it there. It's useless to you in short-term memory. You need to move it to long-term memory. And there are only two basic brain actions, things you do with your brain, actions you take with your brain, that'll move that information into long-term memory. Information does not naturally and normally fall into long-term memory. That is the absorption or osmotic model. That just being in the information, in presence of, that'll go into long-term memory. By the way, for those of you who have taken psychology, this is a bit of a simplification, but bear with me here. The two brain actions are repetition and elaboration. And these are actually classes of brain actions. There's lots of different ways to repeat, and there's lots of different ways to elaborate, but these are the two basic types of brain actions that you can take. So if you've ever remembered anything by repetition, flashcards, how many of you are using flashcards right now? Great. Flashcards are an excellent repetition strategy provided that they're active. By active, I mean you're actually testing yourself with it. So if this is the question side of the flashcard, it asks you a question, what is homeostasis? And if you go, okay, homeostasis is this, and then you check, that's active use of the flashcard. Passive use, osmotic use is, oh yeah, there's another question I don't know. Oh yeah, that's the answer to that question. Passive, merely being in the presence of knowledge. You want to test yourself. Can I make my brain come up with the answer before you look? Never rely on feelings of knowing, because your feelings can be wrong. Yeah, you think you know it. That's really hope, by the way. I hope I know it. You don't want to rely on hope that you know something. You want to know that you know it, and the best way to know that you know it is to test yourself before the instructors do. Because you don't want to find out then that you actually don't know it. You want to know before then, because then there's something to do about it. So test yourself. Quiz yourself with the question. About groups. That's an excellent group study strategy, is to quiz each other. Help produce that knowledge. Discuss things. Dialogue things. Figure things out together. All right. Other repetition strategies are out there. I'll come back to some of them. Elaboration, though, is the other major class of brain action. Elaboration is anything more than mere repetition. So if you draw a picture, if you relate things together, sometimes if you talk to somebody else about it and you try to explain it in more simpler language, that is an elaboration strategy. If you draw a mind map, how many of you know what a mind map is? Some. I'll talk a little bit about mind maps in a second. Could be a flow chart, could be a picture, but you take the words and you elaborate it, you summarize it, you do something more than just merely repeat it. That will also push that information into long-term memory. Again, a bit of an oversimplification, but repetition is what most people would call memory. I think I spelt memory wrong. And this is understanding. So if you are merely repeating, you have created a memory trace, but you may not understand what it is. If you've elaborated, you're more likely to understand it. And understanding and elaboration is kind of like a 2-for-1 deal. If you've understood it, you've automatically memorized it. But if you've merely memorized it, maybe you understand it, maybe you don't. Now, having said that, there is stuff that you need to memorize. There is no easy path, really, to understanding it. You just got to know it. And that's where flashcards are wonderful, because you drill them into your brain over and over again. And some things, that's what you got to do with. Now, let me stop for a second. questions or comments about this, these brain actions that you take? Well, first of all, with the flashcard, if you go, I don't know the answer to that question, look. Oh yeah, that's the answer. And then immediately test yourself again. What was the question? Is it in my brain? Can I say it? No, it's still not there. Okay, it hasn't made it away. Look again. Put it in. What's the answer to the question? The definition of homeostasis has 4 components. A, B, forgotten the other one. What are the other 2? Great. Homeostasis definition has 4 components. A, B, C, D. Homeostasis has 4 components. A, B, C, D. Okay, one more time for good luck. Homeostasis has 4 components. A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D, homeostasis. You have to drill it in. You come back to it, and then you push it into your memory through self-testing. Now, there's some other things that you can do that are an elaboration. You might draw a picture of it. You might use a mnemonic. You might make a summary of it if it's more than just a definition. But you have 2 choices there. But if you're staying within the repetition, come back to it actively, actively. Force your brain to do it. Break it down into chunks. I'll talk about an element of that. There's only so much information you can push through from short-term memory to long-term memory. For those of you who are in the psychology, it's known as the 7 ± 2 rule. If you try to push too much information through, that circuit breaker happens. Pop, brain, too many amperage, brain dead. Done, won't go. And so I often recommend about 5. 5 things you can be actively learning, repeating, or elaborating simultaneously. If you try to do more than 5, your brain's going to get overwhelmed and shut down. Great. So question is, where were notes in here? Notes serve 2 functions. One is note-taking and note-making. Help your brain, force your brain to do either a repetition or elaboration. So that's the first thing about note-making, is that you could, in theory, just read it and do the repetition and elaboration in your head. And that might actually explain some other people that you've met who, when they study, they read the book, but they don't take any notes. And they sit in lecture, they don't take any notes, they just put their feet up, and they get straight A's. And then you see other students who are in the room who are madly highlighting the book in multiple colors. Doesn't really help, but looks pretty, right? And they're in the front row and they're taking verbatim notes, and they're barely making it through the program. Now, the thing about that is, you might think that there must be an intelligence difference between those 2 people, but you can't actually conclude that yet because you're not seeing where learning actually happens, which is up here. It's always in your brain. It's never out here in your notes. It's not what note-taking strategy you're using. You can abuse any kind of note-taking strategy if you're not repeating and elaborating. Highlighting hypnosis is a good example of that. That paint as you go is not a good note-taking strategy, not because there's anything wrong with the highlighter, but because you're not doing either of these things with it. You can use a highlighter effectively.
So are you saying photographic memory does not exist?
So the question is, photographic memory does not exist. The answer is no, it does exist, and those people have a learning disability. It is actually quite a burden to have a perfectly photographic memory, because you remember everything all the time, and it gets in the way. And I won't go through, I don't have time to talk about what photographic memory actually looks like, but most people who think that they have photographic memory don't. Because if they did, it would be a burden. Helpful? Okay. Let me just wrap up this thing about highlighting. I saw your hand, don't throw anything yet. I'm going to put you on pause. Oh, okay. So how you highlight effectively is, if you've got the paragraph and you got your highlighter, the first thing is, do not highlight as you go. It's passive, osmotic. Instead, read the entire paragraph and do this in a loop. I call it a learning loop. Read first, stop at the end of the paragraph, and assess, is there anything in there that I want to move into long-term memory? If the answer is there's nothing there, don't do anything. Don't waste your time. Your time is enormously precious as a student in this program. But if there is something, then you choose your strategy. Do I want to repeat it or elaborate it? If so, how? And then go do that. And then move on and do another loop and another loop and another loop. So how that would look like is, you'd read the paragraph first, you would stop and you go, what's important in here? How do I want to do it? I want to use a highlighter. So then I take the highlighter and I'm going to do a summarization. This is kind of like repetition because you're not really elaborating much, but you sort of are elaborating a bit, because what you're going to do is you're going to identify words in that paragraph and highlight the ones that make an understandable sentence that summarizes what you assess to be the most important thing in that paragraph, so that when you reread the highlighted words in sequence, it actually makes sense. There's a complete thought there. Grammar and tense and all of that is irrelevant. You don't need to worry about that. If you want to get rid of the highlighter, switch to a pen. Then you can underline, you can insert words, you can also do 1, 2, 3. You can break out of it, you can write something over here. If you run out of space in your textbook, get a big post-it note, stick the post-it note in the margin and write onto the post-it note. If you need more than one post-it note, layer the post-it notes. Right? But the idea is that you're summarizing. You're trying to create an actual thought so that, and again the test is, can I read it and does it make sense? The problem with the paint as you go highlighter is usually you come back to it, it doesn't make any more sense, because you've just painted bold-faced words, which were already bold-faced in the first place. Or you've painted too much, and now you have to reread the entire paragraph, because you actually haven't summarized it. This is a repetition strategy that's effective, and it's an example of good note-taking, or making, that forces your brain, because for you to do this, you actually have to understand what's in the paragraph. You can't actually make a new sentence out of there that makes sense, that actually reflects what's in that paragraph without thinking about it. And if you thought about it, you've elaborated and you rehearsed it, and now you've captured it. That's an effective way to use a highlighter. Helpful? How many of you do this already? Great. Now, I mentioned that there are two reasons to use notes. One is to force your brain to repeat and elaborate effectively. The other is for review, so that you don't have to reread your entire textbook before an exam. You want some kind of flag and tag system. You want things identified in your material that you're going to come back to prepare for that exam, or when you go out and do your practice. All right? So you also want to identify things that are important, and you don't want to reread everything. You want a flag. And you can use tape flags for that. You can use post-it note flags. Sometimes I suggest, if you want a cheap way to do flashcards, take your textbook. If you see something in there that's a good answer to a test question, write the question on the post-it note and stick it over the answer in the textbook. You've just made a flashcard, because you can play hide and seek. Can I answer that question? No? No problem. Instructor doesn't know this yet. Look underneath. And if it's highlighted, that's the answer, right? And then you can play it. And as you learn it, if you find that you're really getting that question all the time, take out the post-it note and throw it away. And leave the ones in that are really difficult, that you're still struggling with. In the same way, if you have physical flashcards, you might sort them into the ones I kind of know and I'm done with, and the ones that I'm still struggling with, and test yourself more often with those. Now, if you do this, your textbook's going to form a wedge because of all the post-it notes in it, and you'll need an elastic band to put around it to keep them together so that they don't fall out. But that's a perfectly okay way to effectively use a repetition or elaboration and flag and tag material for later review. Let me stop for a second. Helpful?